Welcome to Being Patient Brain Talks. I'm Deborah Kahn, founder of Being Patient. Welcome to our community. Today, we're going to talk about the last stage of dementia. A lot of you have written in about questions, comments about your experience. So we thought it would be a good opportunity to talk to an expert. I'd like to introduce Dr. Lynn Hallarman. She is a palliative care expert who also lost her mom during the COVID pandemic to complications of dementia. Dr. Hallarman, welcome.
Oh, hello, everybody.
Okay, so it's very unique to have two perspectives, and this just emphasizes the point that dementia is so big, it impacts all of us. Your mom, tell us a little bit about what happened with your mom through obviously this very difficult time of a pandemic.
Well, to sort of summarize it, she was living in what I would call supported independence at, age 92 in New York in an apartment. She had 24-hour aides that she had actually had for years. And when the pandemic sort of started to take hold in New York, and it did so in a really very dramatic way. We're out in Long Island, and we could just sort of literally watch it grow and grow and grow as it came out this way. And we started to panic in terms, my family and I, about how we would handle managing my mom's care. We were trying to maintain what I'll say was a dignity preserved space for her in her own apartment, but I was very involved. My sisters were involved. I was at my mother's apartment, which was about an hour and a half away. So all that's playing out, and we ended up sort of in a rush, sort of moving her to live in New Hampshire near my sister, where my sister could really be much closer and much more in control, and not right where the pandemic was in having a wildfire like it was in New York. And unfortunately, as sometimes happens when people have combinations of, I'll say, frailty and dementia, it was a lot for my mom to have this move happen. She was confused. She had more trouble sort of complying to things we were trying to do in a quick way. Through nobody's fault, she ended up taking a very bad fall. She ended up breaking a bone in her neck, and that triggered this whole sort of rock and roller coaster, I'll call it, of events that led to a hospitalization and lots of stress from me and my sisters, and not being able to see her in the hospital and trying to negotiate all that. We ended up, fortunately, miraculously, getting her out of the hospital, and where she subsequently died of complications of dementia about 2 months later in New Hampshire. So that's kind of our rigmarole, rock and roller coaster that we went through sort of at the end of her life. And that was last year, June 1st, she died.
Okay, and I imagine that was it a case of you're an expert in this stage of life through the work that you've done in palliative care. What like were you prepared? What was that like? Obviously you consult and you help other people going through this process, but here you are going through it yourself.
Mm-hmm. I wasn't. I mean, so much of the time I really just wanted to be a daughter. But it was very hard for me to let go of my palliative care hat. I actually have spent years and years sort of helping families navigate through all stages of dementia. So I felt that I had to be that person for my mother also, but that was difficult actually, because it required that I have this sort of professional hat on some of the times that I really, really wanted to let go of at that time. And I wore it a lot during that time. I wore my professional hat at the end quite a bit, because I was the one who was sort of the chosen one in my family, being the doctor, to kind of interface with the medical field over that time. So I would say it was exhausting, and I learned a lot about what people go through, frankly. It's made me a better doctor, I would say, to have this experience. And I think I've learned a lot of lessons, which I could share a little bit with the audience if they want.
Yeah, I'm sure
Uh,
a lot of people, I
yeah.
guess what I do want you to share those insights with us, but I also want to know, being someone as a professional who was helping people through this stage, you said you did feel surprised about certain aspects of it. What did you feel really not prepared for, or is it right to say that, or what surprised you?
Well, there were things that didn't surprise me, but it was so surprising to like actually experience them because I had been going through things with families for so many years. One of them is just sort of a real disconnect between what you experience sort of in the doctor's office and then what you're actually experiencing at home. And sometimes those things don't align well. And it can be very difficult for families to navigate their daily life, um, you know, uh, with, managing someone who has an advanced dementia and actually connecting up and communicating and coordinating care, because dementia is not something, and there's all types of dementia. You can have Alzheimer's dementia, which is the most common, but there's other types as well. um, and they all have sets of different kinds of behavioral things and different things to watch for. So I think you can get mixed up in trying to actually deal with the everyday of it and not really get what you need from the medical profession. I found that to be the case quite a bit. We really had to run on the phone a lot. We had multiple phone calls. We really didn't get what I would call a coordinated plan for my mother until the very end, where she had a few weeks of hospice, and then we got, I would say, more coordination and communication about what
So
we.
did you feel like you were the person who really had to manage this stage at the very end? I mean, I mean, maybe that's a fault of our medical system and the way that we can, we have our experiences within hospitals. But what made it so difficult, and how did you coordinate it all?
Well, I think one of the things that we don't do well as a medical system is we don't have what I call comprehensive coordination, that all patients are, at any stage of a dementia have access to. There's pockets of it. For instance, hospice at the very end will give you a very coordinated kind of thing where there's only one phone call, they'll have the nurse come, it all is smooth. But before that, you often, as a family member, might have to call the primary care doctor. Then you might have to fill out paperwork to get a bed and then call the place that's going to deliver the bed. You'll have a whole separate pharmacy plan that you'll have to deal with. So equipment is totally separate, care is separate. Then if you need help, if you need a home health aide, that can be extremely complicated to achieve unless you do something called a spend down to become eligible for a Medicaid aid, or you pay for it out of pocket. And that can be prohibitively expensive for many people. It can be about 18 grand a month, 18,000 a month, or as much of that for 24-hour care. So all these components, as a family member, you have to navigate that pretty much on your own, more or less.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your mom in the different stages. I mean, you mentioned moving her was really difficult from New York to New Hampshire during a pandemic. Just tell us a little bit about those transitions and really give us some insights on how you managed them.
So if it's okay, I'd like to share a couple of pictures of my mom. I'm just going to get that
Sure.
up now. And here we go. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Those pictures? So this is my mom. The reason I'm sharing this picture, um, she's in her 80s in this picture. And I think the things to notice is if you sort of look at her, she um, is a very robust, full of life, functioning individual. But around this time, I would say, we started seeing some signs that she was starting to have what we would call memory slips that are very common to see in what we call early stage dementia. And I can tell you that this is one of the hardest things to deal with as a family. It took us probably, my family took about a year of sort of talking to each other on the phone. Have you spoken to mom? Like, is she repeating? Is she forgetting? We couldn't quite sort it out. It took quite a while to do that. Um, and I think one of the mistakes, early mistakes families can make sometimes, or even patients themselves, is thinking that that's all part of normal aging when we have problems remembering to the point where it's impacting our daily function. And that's always the thing I always like to tell families is you're looking at people's memory and cognition, but you're also at the same time looking at their function. So this picture of my mom, she was starting, we were wondering. It took us a while to figure it out, but she was very functionally well. I mean, she could do her day just fine. She didn't need help with her day. So she might have had what we call the beginnings of a dementia at that time. So I just wanted to point that out. Do you have any questions for me about that, or does anybody?
No, wait, continue. I'd love to see your different comparisons through the stages.
Okay, so I put this is one of my favorite pictures of me and my mom, and the reason I put it up there is because she's about a little over 90 in this picture. It was that end of that year that that this all happened, so she's not far from the end when I snapped this picture. She probably at this time had what the doctors would say would be like a mild to moderate dementia by what they call neurocognitive testing, because that's something that doctors often do to determine someone's stage of dementia. However, the part that I want everybody to sort of, the reason I put this picture up is because even though she might have been categorized as having a mild to moderate dementia, she was functionally at this point very impaired. We had full-time aides with her. She could not get through her day. She couldn't give herself her medications. She could not drive. And I wouldn't assume every 90-year-old can't drive, because there's plenty, it's not an automatic. So a lot of the things that my mother had really were related to dementia. If you see there, she wouldn't eat her salad. She ate the oysters. She loves oysters, but it actually became very typically for people that start to advance with dementia. Their eating habits can go all over the chart. They can start getting difficult about eating healthy foods. They often sort of want to go for junk. In my mom's case, like if I took her out, we went out frequently like this because I wanted to be with my mother, and she enjoyed this so much. However, she always wanted an alcoholic drink, actually, which she never did when she was younger, but somehow now she did. So I had to find a non-alcohol. I had to fool her with a non-alcoholic beer, which I actually really didn't like to do because I didn't like to fool my mother. I like to respect my mother, but I had to fool her, and she would get sort of what we call a little bit perseverating, which is a word you use when someone just kind of stuck on something, and that's something very common for these middle stage dementia. She also, you can't see it, she does have a cane, and she was unstable on her feet. And sometimes actually what propels people further in dementia is they get their other medical problems. If they have other medical problems, can actually trigger worsening dementia. In her case, she was prone to falling. She broke a wrist, a shoulder, a hip over that year. It was very hard to keep her stable. Her weight was starting to diminish a little bit, which is also another sign of advancing dementia. And also her behavior was a little bit harder to manage. Like she was just a little bit hard. You had to convince her a lot to do things. So her care, in terms of having caregivers, became sort of a negotiation with her. We had to have strategies. I was often had to be the bad guy in the middle of the night because my mother, listened to me. But so I get a call in the middle of the night. So it started to get difficult, but she still had a life. And the other thing I just want to say out loud to everybody, because you can't remember, it doesn't mean you're just not who you are. You're still who you are, and you're a person. And these times that I had with my mother, I cherish completely because she was still wonderful. She was hysterically funny, very smart,
It's
and I could
funny.
have.
I know I was just going to interject there to say that they always say people with dementia may not be able to remember, but they can still feel with their emotions, right?
Feel, and in my mother's case now, if you spoke to her, she could charm you for quite a few minutes if you didn't know her, because and then it might recycle, like she might say the same things over to you, and then you might realize something's wrong. But she was still herself. And
This is,
I
sorry, what year was this in this photo?
I don't remember. It's not that long. It's maybe a year and a half before she died.
Okay.
I have another picture if you want to, somewhere
Sure.
in stage. If you want me to go on, it's up to you.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I'm finding this very helpful to understand what you were seeing and, and the visual reference as well and what you were experiencing. So please go ahead.
Yeah, and I just want to say, as a sort of suggestion, and this is something I did for myself and suggesting it for the audience, is that I kind of kept a picture diary of my mom. And what I was trying to like absorb was where she was functionally in these pictures. Because when you're going to see your primary care doctor, or you're going, really that's what you want them to know, because that is what's going to determine how much help you need, what kind of planning you have to do. And if you're not talking about function, because doctors sometimes will go right to like how's the blood pressure and the medications, and you can forget that what you really need to tell, my mom, is having trouble walking, we're having trouble getting her to sleep at night, we can't figure out how to get her to eat a healthy meal. These things need to be articulated to the medical professionals, so they can say, you know what, how about let's have you meet with the social worker, so maybe we can fill out an application to get a shower chair and all the things that you need. So I would say, find a way to tell a story through pictures. Write some notes to yourself. Oh, we went out to lunch, but she was unstable and I had a time. Write some notes to yourself. This is what I did, and I think this is a very helpful way to track stages in dementia in a kind of humanistic way, but also to help you look back and say, oh, I see, 2 years ago she was in much better shape than she is now. So the next picture that I have, okay, so, and by the way, I have permission to use these pictures. My mother actually really loved to be part of talks because I gave a lot of talks to medical students, and I used to bring her my talks. So
Great.
she's all in. And the person standing behind her was a longtime aide who also is all in, just to say. Now, this picture, this is probably maybe a few weeks, not even, before my mother died. And you would think she's just fine and dandy, but in fact, if you look closely, she's wearing a neck brace because she actually broke a bone in her neck. And even though she had a very optimistic spirit and she loved to eat, and she, at this point, if we could just get her, to eat cake, we were happy. So my sister made her this cake. It had no special occasion. We just made it. However, she's showing some of the signs of what happens to people as they progress, and we say as they become more frail and they become more functionally impaired. In her case, to get her up off that chair, we had to have a strap around her waist, and we had to have two aides pull her up. She could not walk. She could walk with a walker, but it had to be with someone holding a strap behind her because she was so unstable. She wanted to walk, and if we let her, she would just get up, and that's how she fell, actually. She wouldn't listen. You know, she has a right. She did, and she fell getting some ice cream, actually. That's how she fell, and neck. So she was very frail. she had that neck brace, and this is what often happens to people with dementia. You have dementia and you have something major happen to you, and it sends you on a spiral because your reserve to deal with a sort of medical catastrophe is not so good. So in her case, when she broke her neck and needed this hard collar, which she wasn't wearing properly right now, it's very hard to get her to wear properly. It's kind of pushes the neck up like this. And what happened was she became her muscles in her chest and neck started to weaken, and she already had weakened muscles. She already had them from frailty and dementia. What we know about dementia in the last stages, or as people combine it with frailty, which is the case with my mother, they often develop problems swallowing because dementia is actually a whole body illness. It's not just the brain, and that particularly comes out as people get worse. So they can have other kinds of system failures, we would say. And in my mom's case, and in many patients, they start to have trouble actually swallowing. And they can choke and cough. And she had all of that before the fall. When she finally got that neck brace off, she couldn't eat solid food anymore. We had to actually give her, and she couldn't eat a steak she thinks she liked. She couldn't eat them anymore because she had a lot of trouble swallowing. She would cough, she would choke. She had what we call micro aspiration, meaning that she kept inhaling things from her mouth. Wasn't just food, it could be spit and food that would go into her lungs. And it caused this kind of chronic sort of respiratory or lung problem or coughing, and that, was part of how she died. So it was kind of what I'll say this snowballing, which is what I would see many, many over and over with patients with dementia. They would have a dementia, they'd have diminished function that would lead to either an infection, problems swallowing, something major. And after that, it would lead to a death. That's a very common kind of thing to happen. I'm just going to stop talking in case.
All right, no, that's a really great description of that final stage. And I think the one thing that really stands out to me is that, and I see it in my own mom, and I'm always wondering what's a sign that she's getting worse, is that your mom actually looks quite normal, right, in the photos. And and I guess what it's triggered is really that, and we have a question that's come in too about how do you prepare for this? And because you don't know when the end is going to be. Like if you asked me, my mom has all of those things. She doesn't have the balance issues, but she has, she's obviously losing a lot of words. And so, how do we know when this is the end, and how do you prepare in terms of care and help? How do you do that?
Sure. Do you want me to answer that, or do you have
Yes,
a
please.
question?
You
So
can stop sharing also too, if you don't mind.
say it again.
Can you stop sharing the
Oh,
screen?
sure.
Yeah,
I can do that.
thanks. There you go.
Okay, so I guess what I would say, there isn't the how do you know is complicated. And what I usually tell families is that you want to be preparing, what we say, prepare, hope for the best, prepare for the worst all along. In the case of my mother, she has 3 daughters. It actually took us probably 4 years to get her to do what we call basic planning. We really wanted her to do what's called a power of attorney for finances. So when the day came when she needed someone to write checks for her, when we needed to be able to, my sister ended up being in that role of dealing with her finances. You really need to have a power of attorney for finances. So it's one of the first things I tell people, and it's better if patients get to do this themselves. Once it's out of a patient's hands, then it becomes a whole rigmarole with the courts and with getting a guardianship and all kinds of rigmarole. So patients early need to be sort of helped through figuring out who do they trust to sort of help them, navigate the practical aspects of their life, like their finances. In our family, it was my sister. The second question we got early was, who do you want to help you? Who is your healthcare champion? Who do you want that to be? In my family, it was me. And then my sister was a second. So we did a secondary. So we did early a healthcare proxy, which is what it's called in New York State. It can be called other things in other states. It can be called a durable power of attorney for health. So you want to get that done early. It's saying to yourself, who do I want to be my champion if I cannot speak for myself? It doesn't take away, neither one of these things take away your right to speak for yourself when you can. These only kick in when you can no longer do that. And then a doctor, someone like me, would maybe go to a family member. I see your mother's healthcare proxy. Have the two of you spoken about wishes?
Yeah.
And we would work that out. So I would say early to do that kind of preparation before patients can't. That's the first thing.
Okay. What we have one viewer, Pauline, is asking, my neighbor is living on her own with dementia and is now going to bed early afternoon, plus she's double incontinent. How can we help? I mean, we always think of it the last, as a team effort in care. What if there's someone alone? What would be your advice?
It's so difficult, especially it depends how cooperative that person is in terms of receiving help, which they may or may not be. And they might not be purposely not wanting receiving help. But sometimes what happens, unfortunately, is a person ends up in the hospital. And then it gets sorted out there, especially if there hasn't been family sort of visibly stepping in to a situation. If you have someone that's spending a lot of time in bed, incontinent, guaranteed that it's going to turn into a medical problem sooner or later. So as a neighbor, it's very hard other than just to be compassionate, to recognize that person's humanity, if they will let you into their lives a little bit to see what kinds of things they will allow you to help. You can't force yourself into somebody's house or into their lives. So it's being just sort of as compassionate and gentle. And it may end up being a call to 911 at some point, because then once they're in the hospital, that's one of the problems, is the system waits for a crisis for someone like this, and then once they're in a crisis, then all these systems kick in to deal with it. um, and it's unfortunate, actually, but that's actually the way it is in a lot of places.
And Lynn, Jen is asking, are there different types of durable power of attorney?
It depends on the state you live. So what I always tell people is just, you can go on the online and for your state and see. Most of them you can do yourself. You don't need a fancy pants lawyer for most of this stuff. You can just do it. If you're talking about having a lot of assets, a lot of banks, really they want separate forms and so forth. You have to find out. But you don't need a lawyer just to do a simple power of attorney, and you don't need a lawyer to do a healthcare proxy. You can just go on the web. There's also, if you can't afford a lawyer, it's very good to know that there's huge resources out there which people just don't know about. There's something called public interest attorneys, and every state has them. You can just call your local bar association, or you can call something called the medical legal partnership, and they will help you figure out who's local, and you can get free legal assistance if you really meet the criteria for getting that. So if you do need a lawyer to work through, or you want a lawyer but you really can't afford it, you can do it that way. And I don't get any money from them, but the AARP also has enormous resources as well, so about all this. So those are the kinds of things I would do if you're looking to fill them out. But the first place, just go online.
Okay, and I think people are now looking, some people are asking for your perspective as a doctor. Another viewer is asking, saying, my loved one's sundowning has progressed to the point that every day she wants to go home. She becomes anxious and hell-bent on leaving, carrying the dog and her purse, even though her back is hurting and she can barely stand. Do you have any ideas about what I can do?
What I would say to you is that's the kind of problem that you really want to pick up the phone and call your primary care doctor or who is ever helping you manage, because this actually is a problem that can be helped. You can get help for this problem. And some of it is around how the environment is, and they can have someone maybe come to your house. It just depends, and sort of figure out what environmental things are making things worse or better. Sometimes there's medications, but each patient you have to sort of do a very separate assessment to figure out. Sometimes it's that people have incontinence or constipation or pain. All kinds of things could be impacting what we call sundowning, which is really getting confused at night. It's very common. So there's all kinds of ways to intervene that can really settle that down, but you really have to get an evaluation. You have to get an evaluation by the doctor, and also help someone look at your environment.
Right. Well, I really want to thank you, Dr. Lynn Hallarman. This has been really eye-opening for any of us dealing with dementia, to not only talk about the end stage, but get your first-person perspective as both a doctor and a daughter of someone who has sadly passed from dementia. So thank you so much for the time to come and speak with us. I'm sure more questions will come in, and we could pass them your way if you're happy to answer them for other people in our community.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was really great to
Oh,
speak.
very good to speak to you too. Now, if you missed any of this interview, want to see more of it, we always post them on beingpatient.com. I always say this, please don't forget to sign up to our newsletter. That's when we tell you about upcoming talks that you may be interested in. So that's it for now. Thanks everyone for watching, and thank you, Dr. Lynn Hallarman.